You're sitting on your couch, scrolling through your portfolio app for absolutely no reason when you notice something. Your account went up by $3,847 this month. You glance back at your last paycheck. After taxes, it was $3,820. For 1 month, the version of you that does nothing but sit quietly in an index fund out-earned the version of you that wakes up at 6 in the morning, sits in traffic, and works a full 8-hour shift. Most people would glance at that, think, that's pretty cool, and keep scrolling. But what just happened is actually one of the most important financial moments a person can have. Because there's a point in almost every successful investor's journey where the rules quietly change. A point where your portfolio stops acting like a small helper and starts acting like a second employee. Then, eventually, a second employee becomes a second income source. And one day, that second income source catches you, then passes you. The strange thing? Almost nobody knows when this moment happens. Most people assume it only happens to millionaires, people with yachts, private jets, beach houses, people who are basically retired already. But that assumption is wrong. In fact, the real number is far lower than most people think. And once you understand it, you'll never look at your investments the same way again. Because this isn't really a story about becoming rich. It's a story about becoming difficult to scare. And that's a completely different thing. My name is Merrick, and I spend an unreasonable amount of time thinking about the exact moments where money quietly changes the rules of the game on you. If you enjoy videos that explain money in a simple, practical way, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment. Now, before I give you the actual figure, I want you to guess. Seriously, pick a number. What do you think it takes before your investments are generating as much monthly growth as your paycheck? $1 million? $2 million? $5 million? Most people overshoot dramatically because they assume wealth changes your life when you become rich. In reality, wealth starts changing your life long before that, and the number we're about to calculate proves it. Here's the way I want you to think about this. You actually have 2 separate income sources working on your behalf right now, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. The first is the obvious one. That's you showing up, trading hours and effort for a paycheck. The second is quieter. It's every dollar you've already invested, sitting in the market, working around the clock, including weekends, including the days you're sick, including the weeks you take off. Most people spend their entire lives trying to improve the first source. Ask for a raise, chase a promotion, pick up a side hustle. All useful, all worth doing. But very few people ever stop and ask a fascinating question. At what point does the second version of me become stronger than the first? And when that happens, what actually changes? Before we answer that, there's something important you need to understand. Because this is where most people get confused. When people hear phrases like, my investments made more than I did, they imagine a straight line, as if one day your portfolio earns $4,000. Then the next month, it earns another $4,000. Then another. Then another. That's not how investing works. Markets don't move in straight lines. Some months they're up. Some months they're down. Sometimes they're up so much it feels ridiculous. Sometimes they spend an entire year going nowhere. That's normal. The crossover point I'm describing is about average long-term growth, not guaranteed monthly. Think of it like the ocean. If you stand on the shore watching individual waves, everything looks chaotic. One wave comes in, another pulls back, another crashes sideways. But zoom out far enough and the tide is moving in one direction. Your portfolio behaves the same way. And once you understand that, the math becomes surprisingly simple. Now, instead of throwing a bunch of numbers at you, let me tell you about 2 imaginary workers. The first worker is you. Every month, you show up, put in the hours, and collect a paycheck. The second worker is your portfolio. At first, that worker is practically useless. You invest your first few $1,000s, and it earns enough to buy lunch. Nothing exciting. Meanwhile, you're bringing home thousands every month. So the competition isn't even close. But here's the weird part. Every month, that second worker gets a little stronger. Not because it's working harder, because it has more tools, more capital, more leverage. And unlike you, it never gets tired. It never sleeps. It never takes a sick day. The question isn't whether that second worker catches up. The question is when. And for most people, the answer arrives much sooner than expected. Historically, a diversified stock portfolio has returned somewhere around 8% a year on average over long periods. That means at $100,000 invested, Your portfolio is generating roughly $667 per month on average. At $250,000, roughly $1,667. At $500,000, around $3,333. And now we're getting close. Let's say your take-home pay is around $4,000 per month. Not your salary. What actually lands in your bank account? Based on that 8% assumption, your portfolio's average monthly growth catches up somewhere around $600,000 invested. $600,000. Not $5 million. Not $2 million. Not some number reserved for the ultra-rich. $600,000. And depending on your income, your number could be lower or higher. But for a huge number of working people, it's a number that can realistically be reached during a normal career. Here's where things get even more interesting. If you're investing consistently every month, there comes a point where your contributions start matching less than your growth. At first, your portfolio grows because of what you put in. Eventually, it grows because of what is already there. That's when the machine starts building itself. And once that happens, time becomes more important than effort. This is why two people with identical incomes can end up in completely different financial situations. One spends every raise. The other invests part of it. For years, the difference looks tiny, almost invisible. Then one day, it isn't. Now here's the part nobody talks about. Most financial videos stop at the math. I think that's a mistake. Because the most important thing isn't what happens to your account. It's what happens to your mind. Imagine your boss calls you into a meeting tomorrow. You think layoffs might be coming. 5 years ago, that meeting would have terrified you. Your entire financial life depended on one paycheck. Lose that paycheck and everything feels fragile. But imagine you've crossed the crossover point. Your investments are already generating income comparable to your paycheck. Suddenly, the conversation changes. A layoff isn't good, but it isn't catastrophic either. That's a completely different emotional experience. And that's what money is really buying. Not luxury, not status, not fancy cars, not expensive watches. Certainty, options, breathing room, the ability to think clearly when everyone else is panicking. The second shift shows up in how you negotiate. People who are completely dependent on their next paycheck rarely push back on anything. Not unreasonable hours, not unfair treatment, not poor compensation. People whose money is already pulling its own weight negotiate differently, because the worst-case outcome changes. The third shift is harder to measure, but it might be the most important. You stop measuring your entire worth by your salary or your job title, because you can see, in real numbers, that part of your financial life now operates independently of your job. There's a fourth shift too. You start making decisions from freedom instead of fear. Maybe you take a lower-paying job that gives you more time. Maybe you move closer to family. Maybe you start a business. Maybe you take a few months to find the right opportunity instead of rushing into the first one available. The money itself isn't creating those choices. The freedom is. The portfolio simply purchased the freedom. That's why financial independence isn't really about quitting work. It's about removing desperation. There's a huge difference. Now here's the trap. The moment people understand this concept, they often make one of two mistakes. The first is assuming they've reached the finish line. They haven't. Crossing this point isn't the end. It's proof the process is working. The second mistake is even worse. They start taking unnecessary risks, chasing hot stocks, speculative investments, get-rich-quick opportunities, because they want to accelerate the process. But the irony is that the boring strategy is usually what got them there. The consistent investing, the patience, the discipline, the refusal to panic. The reason your portfolio became powerful is because you gave it time. Don't sabotage that just because it's finally starting to show results. So let's return to the person sitting on the couch at the beginning of this video. They're not retired. They're not a millionaire celebrity. They're not living on a yacht somewhere. They're just checking their account after work. And then they notice something. For the first time, their investments earned more than their paycheck. What's fascinating is that nobody around them knows this happened. Their neighbors don't know. Their coworkers don't know. Their boss definitely doesn't know. From the outside, they're exactly the same person they were yesterday. But internally, something has changed. Because they now understand a truth that took years to build. Every contribution mattered. Every boring month mattered. Every time they stayed invested when they wanted to quit mattered. The account didn't suddenly become powerful that day. It had been becoming powerful for years. That was simply the day they finally noticed. And maybe that's the most important lesson in all of this. Financial freedom rarely arrives with fireworks. Most of the time, it shows up quietly. On an ordinary Tuesday. In an account you've checked 100 times before. As a number that tells you something extraordinary. Your money is no longer just being saved. It's finally working alongside you. And one day, if you keep going long enough, it may end up doing more work than you do. Your future self is going to be the one checking that account on some completely ordinary afternoon, doing a quiet double take, and realizing the math finally caught up. Might as well make today the day you start making that math possible.